December 1981 began quite normally for the people of Great Britain. The country was moving to its own rhythm. The Human League and Madness were topping the charts. Conversations on the street were still buzzing about the recent wedding of Prince Charles and Diana, and the weather was teasing everyone with a mild, almost spring-like warmth. No one expected that in just a matter of days, Britain would be transformed into the set of a disaster movie. This wasn't a gradual cooling. It was a sudden, crushing blow that meteorologists would later label the Arctic Express. A cold front, born in the heart of Siberia and gathering strength over the icy voids of the Arctic, slammed into the British Isles at full speed, leaving zero chance for preparation. Everything changed in an instant. In mid-December, the sky over the country suddenly grew heavy, taking on a strange, leaden purple hue. The wind, which only yesterday had been a mere chill, turned into an icy razor that sliced through any clothing. Within hours, temperatures plummeted from comfortable positive levels to marks that silenced even the most experienced forecasters. But the real chaos was brought by the snow. These weren't fluffy snowflakes. This was a literal white wall collapsing onto cities and villages. In a single night, the familiar landscapes of England, Scotland, and Wales vanished under a blanket of snow that, in some places, grew by 10 centimeters every single hour. By New Year's morning, Britain woke up in a different world. Amidst the festive clinking of glasses, the nation found itself in an icy prison. The suddenness of the strike paralyzed everything. People who had set off to visit relatives for the holidays found themselves trapped in snow traps right on the high-speed motorways. Major roads turned into giant graveyards of abandoned cars, buried up to their roofs within hours. Visibility dropped to just a few meters, and the roar of the blizzard drowned out every other sound. It was a moment when the modern Britain of the 80s, with all its technology and ambition, suddenly felt as vulnerable as it had centuries ago. This was only the beginning. The country did not yet know that ahead lay temperature records that would forever etch the winter of 1982 into history as the most severe and merciless battle between man and the elements. By January 1982, it was clear that Britain was facing more than just a harsh winter. It was an industrial-scale climatic extreme. Atmospheric pressure stabilized in such a way that an absolute calm settled over the islands under clear skies, allowing the last remnants of heat to escape into space. The deep freeze phase had begun. The night of January 9th to 10th would forever be etched into meteorological history. In the Scottish village of Braemar, the mercury plummeted to an unbelievable 27.2 degrees Celsius. It was the lowest temperature ever recorded in the British Isles, matching an absolute record from the late 19th century. But this time, the frost wasn't confined to the Scottish Highlands. In Newport, Shropshire, a staggering 26.1 or Celsius was recorded. Britain had quite literally turned into a block of ice. This cold brought physical phenomena that the modern infrastructure of the 1980s was simply not built to handle. Standard diesel fuel in the tanks of trucks and buses began to turn into a cloudy jelly. Paraffin precipitated out, clogging filters and killing engines instantly. The nation, which relied on its logistics, ground to a halt. But even more terrifying was what was happening to metal. Steel became as brittle as glass. On the railways, tracks began to snap under internal tension, making sounds like rifle shots echoing through the night. Trains were cancelled not because of snow, but because the tracks were literally disintegrating beneath the wheels. Even nature itself made haunting noises. Trees in forests and parks groaned and literally exploded as the sap inside their trunks froze and expanded. Inside homes across the country, people heard strange popping sounds, water pipes bursting as they failed to contain the expanding ice. On that night of January 10th, Britons understood what true cosmic cold felt like. A sensation where the air becomes so thick and prickly that every breath burns the lungs. It was a test of endurance for every bridge, every power line, and every individual. The Britain of the 80s, accustomed to comfort and stability, suddenly discovered that all its achievements were powerless when the planet decided to show its true frozen might. By mid-January, Great Britain faced a phenomenon that seemed impossible for Europe's temperate climate. Due to relentless blizzards and hurricane-force winds, snow canyons emerged along the country's main road arteries. On the M4 motorway, connecting London to South Wales, snowdrifts reached such heights that they completely swallowed road signs and double-decker buses. The road, usually a symbol of speed and progress, had turned into an endless white dead end. Thousands of drivers were trapped, cars became stuck in the snow within minutes, and people were forced to abandon their vehicles, attempting to find refuge in nearby villages or waiting hours for rescue while rationing their remaining fuel to keep the heaters running. The transport paralysis was absolute. Railway tracks didn't just freeze, they vanished under several meters of hard-packed snow. In Wales and southwest England, the situation became critical. Entire towns were completely cut off from the outside world. The snow-clearing equipment available to local councils looked like children's toys against the giant drifts. At this point, the police and the army stepped in, using equipment rarely seen on English roads: snowmobiles. Police patrols on snowmobiles became the only way to deliver insulin to the sick or food to those stranded in their homes on the outskirts. But the most surreal sight was the excavated roads. When heavy machinery finally broke through the blockades, it left behind narrow passages with sheer ice walls 10 to 12 feet high. Cars drove as if through deep trenches, seeing nothing but a sliver of grey sky overhead. Heathrow and Gatwick airports turned into waiting rooms for thousands of desperate passengers whose flights were cancelled one after another. The Britain of 1982, which took pride in its mobility, suddenly realized how fragile that connection really was. The distance of a few miles between neighboring towns became an insurmountable obstacle, transforming a modern state into an archipelago of isolated settlements struggling against the snowy elements. The winter of 1982 was a moment of truth for the new Britain. Unlike 1963, when most people huddled around coal fires, the 80s were an era of technical optimism. Many homes now had central heating, and daily life was tied to electricity and gas. But this very dependence on infrastructure became an Achilles heel. When the mercury dropped below turned to 20 Laud-CT, systems began to fail one by one. Gas mains couldn't keep up with the extreme demand, and electricity grids, overloaded by millions of heaters plugged in as people desperately tried to stay warm, flickered and died. Residents of modern high-rises found themselves in freezing concrete boxes with no way to light a fire, as their ancestors once did. Schools and factories across the country closed down, not just because of snow-blocked roads, but because they were impossible to heat. In classrooms and workshops, water froze inside radiators, and machinery refused to start as lubricants thickened into sludge. The Britain of the 80s striving for economic efficiency, suddenly ground to a halt. Shop shelves emptied quickly. Due to the transport collapse, fresh produce became a rarity. Newspapers of the time spoke of milk wars. Heated disputes occasionally broke out over a single bottle of milk that managed to reach a store. Even if milk made it to the doorstep, it would freeze just as it had in '63, pushing the caps up as a reminder that nature is stronger than any progress. The most harrowing ordeal was the burst pipes. Modern plumbing proved unprepared for such deep ground frost. When the water inside the pipes turned to ice, it ripped through metal and plastic with monstrous force. Thousands of basements and apartments were flooded with water that instantly turned into skating rinks. People were forced to sleep in their living rooms, wrapped in every warm item they owned. The puffer jackets that had become fashionable in the '80s were now worn not for style, but for survival. This winter clearly demonstrated that even in the age of computers and satellites, man remains but a guest on this planet, his life entirely dependent on the whims of the Arctic wind. The winter of 1982 was not as endless as the marathon of 1963. It was different, sharp, explosive, and incredibly concentrated. By February, the Arctic's icy grip began to gradually loosen, leaving Britain in a state of shock. As the snow began to melt, revealing twisted rails, burst pipes, and ruined infrastructure, the nation began to count the cost. The total economic damage ran into hundreds of millions of pounds, an astronomical sum by the standards of the time. But the main takeaway wasn't the money. It was the realization that the climate could shift in an instant, turning a prosperous state into a disaster zone. Many still debate which winter was worse, '63 or '82. While 1963 is remembered for its grueling duration, 1982 went down in history as the year of absolute temperatures. It was then that records were set that still stand to this day. This winter forced Britain to rewrite its safety standards. Road surface compositions were changed, insulation requirements for plumbing were updated, and most importantly, the operation of emergency services in extreme cold was completely overhauled. The experience of 1982 taught the country to act fast and hard, rather than hoping for the mercy of Atlantic winds. Today, looking at the archival footage of that winter, we see more than just snow and ice. We see a generation of people who faced the primordial power of nature in the midst of the disco and VHS era. It was the last great trial by cold before the era of global warming made a true British winter a rare event. But those who remember January 1982 know nature never truly goes away. It only waits. And somewhere out there, in the depths of the Arctic, a new express is already forming, ready to remind us that beneath the thin layer of civilization, the permafrost still lurks, capable of halting the course of history at any moment.